In 1953, Detroit had the highest median income of any major city in America, 1.85 million people, the arsenal of democracy, the richest working class on earth, and today, 40 square miles of vacant land, 70,000 buildings demolished, a city that lost more people than any city in American history, and here is what nobody is telling you about why. On paper, Detroit was the American dream, manufactured, assembled, and shipped to the world. But here in the real world, Detroit has been dying for half a century. The story you have been told, Japanese cars, the riots, bad mayors, that story is a headline. It is not an explanation. Detroit was not killed by outsiders. Detroit was built to collapse from the very beginning. It started with a river. The Detroit River connects Lake Erie to Lake Huron, and in the late 19th century, that single river carried more freight than the Panama Canal and the Suez Canal combined. Iron ore from Minnesota, coal from Pennsylvania, limestone from Ohio. Everything America needed to build an industrial empire converged on exactly one city. Detroit did not become the Motor City because someone chose it. Detroit became the Motor City because geography chose it. And geography, as you are about to see, does not play favorites. In 1914, Henry Ford did something that shocked the entire industrial world. He doubled his workers' wages to $5 a day. That is about $150 in today's money. Overnight, Detroit became the destination. If you could work an assembly line, you could own a house. You could own a car. You could be middle class. By 1950, Detroit had the highest rate of homeownership for Black Americans in the country. Motown was born here. The middle class was invented here. During World War II, Detroit built 1/4 of all American tanks and half of all aircraft engines. President Roosevelt called it the arsenal of democracy, and Detroit believed that title would last forever. Here is what nobody told the people of Detroit. The same geography that made the city rich also made it uniquely vulnerable. Detroit was built for exactly one thing, building cars, not education, not technology. One industry, one product, one reason to exist. And when that one industry started to move, there was no plan B. Between 1947 and 1963, General Motors, Ford, and Chrysler built 25 new plants in suburban Detroit. Not one, not a single one, inside the city limits. The factories that built the middle class became empty shells before anyone realized what was happening. The Packard plant, 3.5 million square feet, closed in 1958. It is still standing today. The largest abandoned factory in the world. And yet, 2 miles from the Packard plant, on a lot that used to be a parking garage, someone is growing tomatoes. The people who stayed did not just survive, they planted. Detroit now has over 1,500 community gardens and farms, making this the most dense and proactive urban farming network in the United States. 40 square miles of vacant land sounds like a statistic of failure. And it is, but it is also space. Space to grow food. Space to build something no suburb can replicate. In what used to be factory floors, they are raising fish. On what used to be crack houses, they are building artist collectives. Detroit is now the largest urban farming experiment in American history, and nobody reports on it, because gardens do not make good ruin porn. But the gardens did not stop the bleeding. July 23, 1967. A police raid on an unlicensed bar at 12th and Claremont. By the end of the week, 43 people were dead. Over 7,000 arrested. 2,000 buildings burned to the ground. The riots did not start white flight. White flight had already been leaking for a decade. But the riots turned a slow leak into a dam break. Between 1970 and 1980, Detroit lost 310,000 white residents. They took their tax dollars, their businesses, and their future with them. Crack followed. Then the subprime mortgage crisis. Then, on July 18, 2013, Detroit filed for Chapter 9 bankruptcy, $18 billion in debt. The largest municipal bankruptcy in American history. A city that once built the American dream could not pay its own light bill. So why did Detroit collapse while other industrial cities survived? Pittsburgh lost steel. But Pittsburgh had Carnegie Mellon University. It had the University of Pittsburgh Medical Center. Now the largest employer in the state, it had a knowledge economy waiting in the wings. Chicago lost manufacturing, but Chicago had finance. It had O'Hare Airport, a global hub. It had a diversified economy that could absorb the shock to one sector. Detroit had cars, and when cars left, Detroit had nothing. Detroit failed not because of where it was. Detroit failed because of what it chose to be, a single industry city in a multi-industry world. The auto companies did not just build factories here. They built an entire society that could only function if those factories never closed. And when the factories left, society did not just crack. It shattered along lines that had been drawn decades before. In 1941, a developer built a 6-foot concrete wall to separate a white neighborhood from a black one. They call it the Burwood Wall, Detroit's Berlin Wall. It is still standing. The collapse was not just economic, it was designed. But here is what the suburbs that one do not want you to know. Troy, Michigan, once the promised land of white flight, the wealthiest city in the state. Today, Oakland Mall, once its crown jewel, is half empty. Anchor stores boarded up. The food court down to 3 vendors. Southfield, Detroit's second downtown. That is what they called it in the 1990s, 26 million square feet of office space. Today, nearly 30% of it sits vacant. Companies that fled Detroit for Southfield are now fleeing Southfield for nowhere. They are just gone. Macomb County, the heart of Reagan Democrat country. The voters who fled Detroit in the 1970s and voted for Donald Trump in 2024. Their median household income has dropped 12% in 20 years. Their children are moving further out, to Rochester, to Oxford, to places their grandparents had never heard of. The American dream just keeps moving further away. First it left Detroit, then it left the inner suburbs. Now it is leaving the outer suburbs. This is not a Detroit problem. This is a pattern. Detroit was just the first domino. Detroit's isolation did not just protect it from the boom. It protected it from the bust. While the suburbs chased growth and found vacancy, Detroit bottomed out, and then started building something the suburbs cannot replicate. Something authentic, something that cannot be developed on a green field. Detroit lost 65% of its population, and yet the people who stayed bought houses for $1 and turned them into homes. They turned abandoned schools into artist collectives. They built the largest urban farming network in the country, from the rubble of the largest urban collapse in the country. Detroit is not recovering. Detroit is becoming something America has never seen before. In 1953, Detroit had the highest median income in America. Today, it has the most community gardens. One number measures what was lost, the other measures what was built from the rubble. Detroit is not dead. Detroit is the first American city to live through what is coming for many others. And when it happens to your city, remember, Detroit already wrote the playbook.